Jump back to the year 2020, infamously now known as the year of COVID-19. One Friday morning, I'm at home doing my work when I get a phone call from Australia, and the voice on the other side of the line is instantly unmistakable.
Michael J. Crocodile Dundee.
Ah, yes, that accent that me and my childhood friends all imitated as we called each other mate as children and said, "That's not a knife."
That's a knife.
It was none other than Paul Hogan, who at the time was promoting his film, the very excellent Mr. Dundee, which despite the name I have to say, was not very excellent, but I digress. In the movie, Hogan played himself, getting cancelled on the eve of his knighting. Jacob Elordi from Euphoria played his son before he got super famous.
You have a knife, but mine's bigger.
That's not the line.
Yes,
That's not the line.
I've been doing this for 20 years. I think I'd know.
As I said, the movie wasn't great, but Hogan himself was a gem, and amazing to talk to, with him chatting to me much longer than he had to, telling me a bunch of stories from his career, such as when he was hiking in LA and came across some folks being menaced by a snake they all assumed, quite incorrectly, that he would be able to deal with.
Aborigines, well, like all God's creatures, they just want the right to roam across the earth and be left in peace.
Naturally, we spent a lot of time talking about Crocodile Dundee, a movie I watched over and over and over again as a kid, and I'm still incredibly fond of. People may not realize it now, but Crocodile Dundee is one of the most profitable films ever made. It was shot for only $8 million in Australian currency, and made $336 million at the global box office, which was equal to about $800 million now. It was the second highest grossing film of 1986, just coming in a hair under Top Gun.
There are no points for second place.
It led to an American fascination with Australia that was memorably lampooned on one of the best Simpsons episodes ever.
This is a knife.
That's not a knife, that's a spoon.
All right, you win. I see you've played knifey spoony before.
And it got 2 sequels, one of which, Crocodile Dundee 2, was a massive hit that actually beat Rambo 3 at the box office on Memorial Day weekend, 1988. And I gotta say, as a 6-year-old, that was the movie that I went to see that weekend.
Mick! Yeah? You're back! Yeah? You're back!
Yes, what?
I missed you.
I know.
The drinks are on the house.
Paul Hogan became a pop culture icon with Crocodile Dundee, one of the most instantly recognizable heroes of the 80s, up there with Indiana Jones and Rambo.
Mick Dundee from Australia. How are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I think from
Good.
this guy. This guy
In
makes...
town for a couple of days. Probably see you around.
Fine.
Yet Hogan's Mick Dundee is a much gentler and perhaps misunderstood humor. For all its stereotypical Australian trappings, such as a love of Foster's beer and hell-raising with the sprawling outback, a treacherous but exciting playground for Mick and his love interest, the American Sue Charlton, played by Paul Hogan's eventual wife Linda Kozlowski, to fall in love in, it's kind of forward-thinking in a way lots of people don't appreciate. So if you go online, you could probably find a million think pieces that call Crocodile Dundee racist or homophobic. Maybe from a modern lens, the movie is a bit problematic, but then again, this was made in 1986, and things were simply different back then, and I think that Paul Hogan's intentions were always pretty good.
Looking for a good time, honey?
Always looking for a good time.
For one thing, Dundee in the film is shown to love and appreciate Australia's Aboriginal population, which, in both films, are actually portrayed quite heroically. The movie also has a strong anti-poaching message. While it's suggested that Mick himself is poaching crocodiles, in the third film, he actually becomes a conservationist, and there's a pretty famous scene in the film that shows a bunch of Australian businessmen going crazy in the bush and shooting up a bunch of kangaroos, which is depicted as monstrous. Mick grabs his rifle after Sue kind of baits him, and using a kangaroo corpse he calls Skippy as cover, he shoots up the poachers, sending them home licking their wounds in a scene that, as a kid, I thought was the coolest thing ever.
Good one, Skippy.
He doesn't kill anyone, though. Even in the sequel, which is more of an action film, Dundee never takes a life. And in fact, the only one who actually kills anyone in the second film is Sue, who takes out the main bad guy at the end of the film. And a recurring gag for the movies is that she's always been presented as this very, very capable markswoman, despite the fact that she's a big city gal. In fact, I kind of like that about the movies, because Sue could have been portrayed as just hysterical, running around the outback, screaming whenever she sees a snake, But in the movie, she's actually shown to absolutely love the outback and to be very capable. Sure, Mick does save her a couple of times, but she also saves him several times in the sequel, and really seems much more at home in the whole surrounding than, well, Mick does when he goes to New York later in the movie, which makes it kind of a great fish-out-of-water comedy, doesn't it?
Some nitwits put 2 dunnies in here.
1 dunny, 1 bidet. It's for, after you know, you figure it out.
As Hogan himself told me, though, he wanted to make an action hero that, well, didn't really kill people. Mick didn't have any superpowers. His only superpower was that he had a great sense of humor, although, I don't know. In this movie, and especially in the sequel, he does kind of have superpowers. He seems very in tune with nature and with animals, almost to the point that he's magical.
Jesus.
He did single out, though, the famous knife scene. The "that's not an off" scene, that's an off. In a lot of movies, as he said, he would have pulled out the knife and stabbed a few people, but he didn't. He dismissed the situation with humor, and that was the intention. As I told him, I felt like Mick could have probably gone for a couple beers with those youths that hassled him with the knife afterwards, and he laughed and said, yeah, sure, probably would have. So, Dundee never kills anyone, but I maintain that Hogan throws probably the best punch of the 80s with amazing Foley work, backing up any sequence where he punches out bullies, high society types, and even a vicious pimp and his goons. Indeed, Crocodile Dundee works on a lot of levels. It's a really interesting take on the fish-out-of-water comedy, with Mick himself taking on the role in the second half of the film as he goes to New York. Hogan never presents Dundee as too ultra-macho either. There's a great scene early in the movie where he dismisses a brawl by kissing a guy on the lips, something that no other leading man at the time probably would have done. And there's nice little throwaway moments, such as when he pretends to shave with his knife, but actually has a Bic razor he has hidden in his belt that he prefers. There are so many great scenes in Crocodile Dundee, especially when Mick gets to New York and has to try to win over Sue, who's torn between her love of Mick and her desire to marry into high society. She actually seems to be playing some kind of cruel games with him early on, with her flirting and romancing him, only to surprise him with the fact that she's engaged to another man.
The hotel, Mick?
Yeah, Gus. Oh, I have a liquor store.
It all comes to a great ending, though, with Sue coming to terms with the fact that Mick, well, he's the man for her. And it ends with her having to win him back on a famous scene on a subway platform where they're all communicating messages back and forth.
Tell him don't leave. She's not gonna marry Richard.
Don't leave. I'm not gonna marry Richard.
It's a movie, it's a scene that I absolutely loved when I was a child, and I think it still holds up now. It always makes me smile. Now, it could be noted, of course, that there are certain things about the movie that maybe haven't aged quite as well. And I have to say it's probably Mick's, let's say, curiosity when he meets a few gay characters. Now, it could be argued that his intentions in the film are very naive and not malicious.
I've been trying to tell you all night, that girl, she's a guy. A man dressed up as a girl.
And Hogan himself told me when I asked him about jokes that haven't aged well that, well, there were some attitudes that have been around forever and shouldn't be, but I never do anything with bad intentions. Some of the racier jokes in the movie are still kind of funny though, such as when he mistakes a cokehead at a party for a guy with a cold and accidentally ruins his stash. It's interesting because the first film is actually very casual towards drugs, but the sequel is super a product of the war on drugs, with Hogan himself taking on a Pablo Escobar-style baddie and leading him to his doom in the outback, with him and his Aboriginal pals having their way with him. Overall, Crocodile Dundee remains a favorite movie of mine, as it's just so damn positive. Has it aged super well? No. There are a couple bits in the movie that could be construed as homophobic and don't really add anything to the movie. But I also, again, don't think that Hogan himself was necessarily racist or homophobic. I think that the attitudes of the time were simply the attitudes of the time, and again, I think that it's actually quite forward-thinking in its depiction of the Aboriginals, although perhaps people from the region might disagree with me.
Nice to meet you, Sue.
Bye, Nev.
I'll catch up with you, Nev.
If you can get over these facts, though, I have to say, Crocodile Dundee is still kind of a great movie. I watched it again to prepare for this column, and I had a blast watching it. I really think it's a lot of fun. And one of the things that I always liked about these films isn't that Dundee's superpower is how well he hurts people, but rather the fact that he makes friends so easily, as they come to his rescue when needed, such as a great sequence at the end of the movie when his chauffeur, played by a pre-Die Hard Reginald VelJohnson, beats up on the pimps that got the upper hand on Mick.
You sure you're not Pindanjara tribe?
No, man, Harlem Warlord.
I can't help but love this movie, and if you haven't seen it in a while, given that it's a film of its time, give it a watch. I think you'll have a blast. When a movie is as big of a hit as Crocodile Dundee, you better believe there's going to be a sequel. In fact, audiences that rented a VHS tape of the original film back in 1987 had a little introduction before it, teasing the fact that a sequel was in the works.
Paramount Pictures is proud to announce Crocodile Dundee 2, coming to theaters everywhere for the summer of '88.
Something all of us kids who grew up with this movie were pretty psyched by. So when the first movie came out, Paul Hogan became a massive international star. He was already big in Australia, but before Crocodile Dundee, Hogan was mostly known for his shrimp on the bobby Australian tourism adverts in North America.
Better fill the icebox, then fire up the barbie. Because Aussies like to make you feel at home.
In 1987, though, he was so popular that he was one of the 3 hosts of the 1987 Academy Awards, opposite Goldie Hawn and Chevy Chase. Crocodile Dundee 2 would be a much bigger film than its predecessor. After all, this wasn't a small Australian indie anymore. It was a big studio film, with Paramount Pictures, who distributed the first film, bankrolling it for $14 million. This was many times higher than that of the original film, but still relatively cheap.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's worthless.
Now, the first film was famous for being a fish-out-of-water movie. The sequel, they simply reversed the formula, putting the fish back into water in a manner of speaking. As such, it falls into a bit of a different genre than the first movie, which was essentially a romantic comedy with nods at action-adventure. This would be pretty much a straightforward action movie, albeit done in a lighthearted way.
I knew it was you all the time. First you shoot my head, then you try to drown me.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our Joblo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
As the movie starts, Mick Dundee is happily living in New York with Sue Charlton, once again played by Linda Kozlowski. He's adjusted to living in the big city pretty well, and seems pretty popular, with even the cops giving him an "Oh, Mick" when they catch him fishing with dynamite in the Hudson River.
Breakfast!
Get out of here.
All is going pretty well until Sue's ex-husband, an investigative journalist, is killed on assignment by a Pablo Escobar-style drug lord. It turns out that he caught the Baron, Luis Rico, killing a man on camera, and sent the film to Sue before being killed. She's snatched up by Rico's henchmen and held for ransom, with them wanting the film. When he tries to exchange the film for her, Rico's henchmen try to kill him, only for him to foil the attempt thanks to some helpful Japanese tourists.
You know who that was? Clint Eastwood!
He ends up rescuing Sue from their fortified mansion with the help of a streetwise buddy named Leroy, played by the great Charles S. Dutton, and a local street gang. But Rico and his men get away and swear to kill both Mick and Sue. So what are they going to do? They head back to Walkabout Creek in Australia to get help from his old mates.
Mick! You're back! You're back! I missed you. I missed you.
Plus the Aboriginals, and lead the drug lords on a wild goose chase through the outback. So while the first Crocodile Dundee movie featured Mick and his Aboriginal friends having mystical powers, the sequel really doubles down on this, with them virtually able to vanish into thin air. We also get a little more background on Mick this time, with it revealed that he was raised by the Aboriginals and that his family actually owns much of the outback, but that he's refused to consider it his property out of respect for its original inhabitants, the Aboriginals, which is pretty forward-thinking on his behalf, I think.
This area we're in now, does it have a name?
Belong to Mick.
Belong to Mick. Does that mean something?
Mick's place.
Okay, why does it mean that?
Because I own it, I guess.
The film winds up becoming much more of an action film, with probably the biggest departure from the first movie being that the humor really takes a back seat. So much so, in fact, that it was a sticking point for some fans and critics, but the film has a nice vibe, with Dundee as fun to watch in his element as out of it. The movie has more than a few classic moments, albeit none quite on par with the "you call that a knife" scene, one of which is when he uses his knife on a mohawk.
What are your chances of getting out of here with that jacket on?
Better than average.
and another is when he takes a swan dive off his apartment's balcony with a rope and crashes into an office with a charming g'day.
Oh, excuse me.
The musical score is similar to the first film and effective in an action-driven setting. Also keep your eyes peeled for early roles from people like Stephen Root, Luis Guzman, and even Colin Quinn of SNL fame. While people maybe think this was less successful than the original film, that's only true in some of a sense. It was actually a massive blockbuster, making $109 million domestically, meaning it was the 6th highest-grossing movie of 1988. It infamously opened opposite Rambo 3 and wound up grossing twice as much as that movie on a minuscule $14 million budget compared to Rambo 3's, which was close to $60 and one of the most expensive movies of all time. That said, it was still over $70 million shy of what the first movie made. But, of course, the first film was a one-of-a-kind hit and a runaway smash. Worldwide, this made close to $240 million, which was big money for 1988. But that was still about $90 million shy of what the first movie made. Nevertheless, Paul Hogan ended 1988 as a major star, one of the biggest in Hollywood's, but it wasn't to last. In 1990, he made another movie with Paramount called Almost an Angel, which only made about $6 million, and that essentially ended his career in the States with him seen kind of as a fad. Within a few years, he'd be playing third fiddle to Elijah Wood and a dolphin in the Flipper movie. He tried to resurrect Mick with Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, but the series had simply run its course by that time, and it only made about $40 million worldwide. And in fact, Tom Green took issue with even that reported figure, telling the media that kids actually bought tickets to Crocodile Dundee and sneaked in to see his own movie, Freddy Got Fingered, which was a hard R.
Daddy, would you like some sausage? Daddy, would you like some sausage?
After that, Hogan stuck mainly to Australian films, had some tax problems, although he did try to do a couple of movies, such as a Curb Your Enthusiasm-style satire called The Very Excellent Mr. Dundee, and he was the center of a hoax revolving around a Super Bowl commercial that made it look like Danny McBride was playing Mick's now-grown son in a sequel. The commercial had cameos from almost every big Australian movie star out there except Mel Gibson, but alas, it was all a joke.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
So while Crocodile Dundee's run as a franchise was kind of short, it can't be denied that the first movie is a classic, and hey, part 2, pretty damn good too.
You ready to go home now?
I'm home.